Hey guys, this is Mitch with Finepoint CGI, and today we're going to talk about how to integrate Postgre into Godot for C#. So we're going to go through the process of installing the database plugin that we're going to be using, which in this case is going to be Npgsql, and it's a well-known SQL tool that basically everybody I know that uses C# uses this toolkit to integrate with Postgre. So we're going to talk about how to install Postgre and work with it. We're going to talk about how to use it as a Docker container. We're going to talk about how to get the plugin installed. We're going to then connect to the database, run a couple of queries. So how to do a non-query, how to do a scalar query, how to get data back from the database. And then we're going to talk about how to do transactions, the benefits and disadvantages as opposed to a batch action. And then we're going to pull back our user data from 3 different tables, join some data up, and pull back our character information. So that's what I have in store for you guys today. Let's go ahead and get started. All right, so the first thing we need to talk about is how to install Postgre. Now, it's up to you on how you want to approach this. There's a lot of different options here. So Postgre is one of the world's best databases out there. And the reason why I say that is because from AI to enterprise level data, Postgre is the best database I know to do all this. You can have non-structured data, you can have structured data, and you can do, like I said, AI integration and do things like RAG using this database. So it's a really great database for a lot of use cases. And this is one of the reasons why I'm doing this tutorial, because Postgre is such an awesome database. Now, in this tutorial, I'm not going to go over every nook and cranny of Postgre. I'll leave that for you to figure out, but I'll at least get you started. So the first thing we have to do is actually download and install Postgre. Now, you have 2 options for this. Number 1, you can come in here, click download, and then choose your operating system. In my case, I'm on a Mac, so I would do Macintosh, and then I would probably just do a homebrew install. So if you've never used brew, then you can actually install it by running this little command here, and I'll leave a link in the description below so that you guys can actually download and install it. Now, I already have it installed, so that's an option, but you can do brew install Postgre 17. So if you were to open up a new window here on my terminal and I type brew install PostgreSQL and then version 17, that's the latest version. It's up to you on what version you want. In my case, I would use Postgre 17 because Postgre is the latest version is 17. It has the most features and things like that. Now, the other option that you have when it comes to installing Postgre is using Docker. And Docker is amazing. It's a tool that I use a lot in my personal life and in my professional life. Think of it as a way to host all of your stuff on one computer using different containers. So the cool part is that it doesn't really affect your computer itself. It containerizes it and only has that application when you need it. Whereas if you use something like Homebrew, you are installing it on your computer directly. You're not containerizing it. So we're going to do the container method here. And we're going to be using the Postgre official image here. And the nice thing about this is if you want, you can install Docker by just hitting download Docker desktop and then choosing your version. In my case, I have an Apple Silicon, so it'll download it. And then you'll see here that all I have to do, click on this guy, double click on my DMG, and then I can just drag and drop it into my applications. Now, I already have it installed right here, and you'll see that I have a Nakama server tutorial right here, which is what I use for my tutorials. Now, of course, obviously you guys don't have to have this, but that's the beauty of Docker is that I can just spin this up whenever I need it. So I don't have to run it all of the time. Now, once you have Docker installed, pulling the Postgre image is really easy. They actually tell you exactly how to do it. Docker run name Postgre -e Postgre password, right? My secret password, and then -d Postgre. Now you can copy this and open up a terminal, which in my case I already have, and paste it. You might run into a small issue, or if you hit enter, it'll say command not found. And the reason why that's a thing is because when you copy this, it pulls that $, which causes some problems. So we'll go ahead and get rid of that. And then I'm also going to come in here and I'm going to add in at the back end of this -p for port. And I'm going to go 5432:5432. And basically what this does is it says, I'm going to break this down for you really quick. What this does is we're going to run a Docker container. We're going to name it some Postgres. Now you can name it whatever you want. You can name it my tutorial. You can name it literally anything. So if I come in here and I change this to Postgre tutorial like that, and then your password here, you can put whatever you want. My secret password is fine. And then -d is the actual image that we're doing. So we're doing the Postgre image. So that is probably going to be, let me see if it's -Postgre. It'll probably pull latest, which is fine. That's probably what we want right there. So we'll do that. And then this -p here is the port. So computers are designed to have ports, right? They're entry points into your computer. So you want to make sure that you assign ports properly. And this is the from port to port. So from the container port of 5432 to my local computer's port 5432. Now, you don't really need to know a lot about this just yet, but when you're doing a lot of hosting of things, you might want to matrix different ports to different things. For instance, if I have like 5 websites, right? On standard internet stuff, right? You might want one to be at port 8080, and then you might want one on port 2000, right? That way you can hit the port 8080 by just going to your website. And if you want to do the other web server, you could do :4000, and that would allow you to point to that specific web address or that specific website, if that makes sense. Now, obviously that's way beyond this tutorial, but it's just something to keep in mind. Then we'll hit enter and you'll see that it's going to give me a big GUID back. And that's basically just saying, hey, you've successfully ran this. If we open up Docker Desktop, you'll see that I have a Postgre image here. Now it does say exited, so let's see why it says exited. In value for parameter port 5432:5432. Let me see. Let me double check if do I need to put it, and then I will delete this really quick. Okay, and that fixed it. So basically just flipping these two solves it. So that's my fault. But there we go. You can see we have a running Postgre server here. If we click on this, you can see it says the database system is now ready to accept connections. So now we need a way to manage this database. And that is where pgadmin comes in. Now, you also can do a Docker container of this, but in my case, it's just a lot simpler to just download it and install it. So we're going to click the download button here. And pgadmin's job is to allow you to manage your Postgre instances. So I'm going to click on Mac OS and I'm going to choose PG 9.4. And then we will go and install it. So I'll pick the DMG that they have. And I already have this installed, but I'm going to go through the process of installing it anyway. But basically, if you run a non-Mac machine, of course, you can download the APT, the Windows version, the RPM, right? Or if you really want it to be truly cross-platform, you can go ahead and grab a container as well. So it is available on the Docker Hub, and I'm just talking about this while I'm downloading, but you can literally pull pgadmin right here and use it if you would like. And now that we have it downloaded, we can double click on it and hit agree, and it's going to go and open it up. Now, again, it depends on what kind of operating system you're running. Like I said, in my case, I'm having a Mac, so it's going to be slightly different than if you were on Windows or Linux. Now, all you got to do is drag this into the applications. Like I said, I already have this installed, so I'm going to hit the X button. Now, if I hit, now we need to open up Now at this point, we need to open up pgadmin. So pgadmin. And of course, if you have Windows, just open it up via the start menu and we will hit open. We're going to click allow. And so this is pgadmin. Now I know the first thing that you're going to ask, whoa, you have dark mode, right? That's my first thing I look for. If you go into configure pgadmin, underneath miscellaneous user interface down here, and there's a theme for dark mode right here. And it's just easier on my eyes. So we'll stick with dark mode here. So I'm going to hit cancel because I've already saved this. And we need to add a server. So we'll click add server. We'll type for the name, tutorial. For connection, our home address is going to be localhost, and we're going to do 5432. And by default, the username is going to be Postgre, and then the password will actually be the password we used on our terminal. So you can see right here, it's my secret password. So we'll copy that and paste it. And then if you want to save the password, you can, and then click save. And you'll see that we will connect to our server. So you can see here, we have everything about our little database right here. So you can see our schemas, which in this case, if we look at our tables, it's empty. But you can see there's so much here. There's event triggers, catalogs, there's casts, extensions, right? Publications. There's so much stuff in here that it would take an entire detailed tutorial to go through everything when it comes to Postgre. So just keep that in mind. Now, once we have this, we're pretty much good to get into Godot. So let's jump into Godot here and let's go ahead and get started on this. So in order to get started, the first thing we need to do is let's add in a user interface. Let's right click, add in a script, and let's call that script, let's make it C#, and we'll just call it Postgre tutorial.cs, and we will hit create. Now that's going to open up VS Code, and now is a good time to mention, if you have never set up VS Code, please check out my tutorial on how to set up C# within. And now we can come in here and actually start coding our stuff. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to install the proper add-on to be able to interact with Postgre. So C# has some standards, right? And one of the big ones is we actually have a built-in Postgre library that handles all this. I'm going to open up a terminal here. I'm going to hit new terminal, and I'm going to come in here and get rid of this output because I don't need it. And what we'll say is we'll say n, and we're going to come into here, and you'll see we have a .NET add package, Npgsql. So this is the plugin we'll be using today. This is the one that I use out on my own projects, right? When I work at companies and things like that that uses Postgre, this is the plugin I'd like to use. So we'll go ahead and paste that in. We'll add that guy in, and it'll be nice and quick. So you can see, bam, we already have it. Nice and easy. And now all we have to do is just create a connection string. So we'll come in here and say private const string connection string, and we'll make that equal to something like host is equal to local host semicolon port equals 5432 semicolon database is equal to our database, which is PostgreSQL, like that. So we'll type Postgres, and then we'll do username, and we'll go equal to whatever our username is. Now, in our case, it's going to be Postgres as well. And then finally, password. And we'll make that equal to what our password is, which in our case, if you remember, if we go back to our terminal, it is my secret password. So we'll go ahead and drop that in right there. And there we go. Nice and easy. Now, of course, as with most things in C#, you can drop this out as an application setting and then just call it a day, right? You can put it in your app settings and be done. But in our case, I'll just leave it like this for now. And now we need to connect to our database. So let's go into our ready here and actually connect to that database. So in order to do it, we need to create what's called a data source. So we'll say private up here, private Npgsql data source, like that. and we'll just call this data source like so. And then we'll come down here and we'll actually set that data source up. So the data source is basically a way to pull data from the database. So we'll say data source is equal to Npgsql data source dot create, and then we'll go ahead and create that connection string like that. And that will allow us to connect to it. And now we can come in and actually do our connection. Now, when we want to create our connection, all we need to do is come in and say await using var connection is equal to await data source dot open connection async dot configure await, and we'll say false on that. And basically this is just a setting that I'm setting so that we don't marshal our connection. Don't worry about that. It's nothing to do with you guys. Just set that up. And then we can come in and say, yep, we've connected. So gd.print connected to database. And then from here, we actually can create our tables. So I'm going to create a function to create some tables because usually you want to abstract this stuff out so it's not one giant function call. And you can see that this automatically got transferred to an asynchronous task. Now, Godot is going to get mad because of how this is set up. So I don't want this to return a task because it's not going to work. So we'll do a void instead, because Godot just gets mad when you do asynchronous tasks. It's just not set up to handle it. So we'll just do that. And we'll say private void async task, and we'll say create tables, and we'll pass in our connection. So our connection that we're going to pass in is the Npgsql connection like that. And that means up here, we're able to call that. So create tables, and then we'll just pass in our connection like that. Nice and simple. And we can always await that as well. And when we come into here, create tables. So how do we actually create tables? Well, you can create tables pretty easy. You can say var user table, and we'll make that equal to @ and then we'll create our table. So create if not exists users, and then we'll say ID serial primary key username var char, and we'll do that at 100 not null, and then we'll do level, we'll make that an integer, we'll do email, we'll do that at a var char 200 like this. And again, I don't know if I said this earlier, I might have, I might not have, but you don't actually need to use capitals, but it's just standard inside of SQL to do it. So I'm just doing it for that. And then we'll do active, default is true, and then we'll say created _ at timestamp with time zone. Default is current timestamp. And then the last one is going to be a metadata. And that's just going to give me the ability to explain to you how we can actually do some wild stuff here. Now, you see this, and we can actually call this function pretty easy. And in order to do that, all we have to do is say await using var create table cmd is equal to a new npgsql command, and then we'll pass in our SQL that we're using. So user table, comma, and then our connection like that. And then we can say await create temp table cmd dot execute, and you can see we have different options here. So execute non-query allows us to execute that query as a non-query. So we're not expecting anything back. Async does asynchronously. As you can see, I have an await, so we're going to do asynchronous. But then we also have reader and scalar. And just remember that those exist. So we'll say execute non-query async, and we'll do that. And now, in theory, I can call it right here, and it should, hopefully just work. Odds are likely it's probably going to break, but we can try it. So we'll click right here. We'll hit play, and we'll save our scene here. And we have a debugging error. We did get connected to database, so that's good. We look at our error, void syntax error near if within our Postgre exception. So my assumption is we probably have a problem with our code here. So create table if not exists. That's my fault. So let's try that again, because we want to create our table if not exists. And actually, now that we're here, let's take a step back. I completely spaced to tell you guys. So what is this doing exactly? So basically, we're creating a table if it doesn't exist, right? We're naming it users. We're creating a column called ID. It is a serial and a primary key. Now, what does that mean to you? Well, a serial means it's going to increment every time you insert data, and primary key means that Postgre is going to look at it as if it's an extremely important key for your project. So this is a way for you to have a unique identifier for that row that's really efficient and easy to manage. Username, it's a varchar, so it's a text characters, and it's going to be size 100, and it's not null. So that means that we must have data in it for it to work. Level is an integer. That's pretty self-explanatory. Email is varchar 200. Now you'll see that varchar 200 versus varchar 100. Well, why did I do that? Well, typically usernames have an upper limit, and it's up to you on whatever the character limit is, 20, 30, 50, 100, right? This allows us to tell Postgre how big that value should be. That way, it can create tables, a column that is specifically sized for that email value. If it doesn't, what's going to happen is they'll do what's called varchar max, and basically it's going to be a 255 character string, and it's just going to use up all that space. So think of it like this. Varchar 100 is half the size of varchar 200. And every time you insert data, whether it has data or it doesn't, whether it's 1 character or it's 100 characters, it's going to take up the same amount of space. So telling it to be a varchar, whatever it is, so in this case 100, that's going to reduce the size of your database by a lot. If you think about it, if you had 1,000,000 records with a varchar of 250, all million records would be 250 million characters total, right? Whereas if it was set to 100, then it would be 100 million characters total. So that's the size difference, if that makes sense. It's kind of difficult to explain because I'm very bad at it, but that's basically the gist of what that is. Active Boolean, and you can see here we're defaulting it to true, and then we have a created at timestamp with time zone default. So this is just saying I'm creating a timestamp for my stuff, and it's going to default to the current timestamp of today. And that's just a nice way for us to know when was this created. A lot of times when you're doing database forensics, you want to create it at timestamp so that you can do some checking to see when did this person show up, things like that. So that's kind of the use case there. So I'm going to Control S, and I'm going to refresh this, and you'll see that we got no errors and we got nothing back. So that's good, probably, but we'll hit the stop button right here, and we'll go to pgadmin. And you'll see we got a big spike right here where it did some stuff. So what did it do? Well, if we right click our table, we refresh, you'll see we now have a users table that has those values. So good, it worked, right? And that's awesome. That means that we have everything set up the way we want to. So now the question is, how can we actually select data or insert data? So in order to do that, we're going to do a parameterized query. Now, a parameterized query basically allows your code to not get SQL injected. So it's a huge benefit for you to use them. As a matter of fact, I'm not even going to teach you how to do it the other way because it's completely unsafe and frankly irresponsible to do it that way. So in order to do a parameterized query, what we'll do is we'll come in here and say var query is equal to insert into users, username, level, email, metadata. And we'll pass in some values. And those values are going to be basically at queries. So at username, comma, at level, comma, at email, comma, at metadata. And we're going to type that metadata as JSONB. And we won't return anything, although technically if we wanted to, we could return an ID or something like that if we would like. And then we'll come in here and fire off that query. Now, in order to do that, we actually need to create that query, right? So we have the query here. We need to now like compile it basically. So how we can do that is we can say await using CMD var CMD is equal to new Npgsql command SQL query, comma, and then we have to do the connection. So our connection here. And then we can come in here and add those parameters. So we'll come in here and say CMD dot parameters dot add. We'll add in a new NPG parameter, quote at, and then we'll put in our parameter. So in this case, it's going to be username, comma, and then we have to pass in a type. And that parameter type can be whatever we want it to be technically, but you can see they have a bunch of different types here. And in our case, we're going to want it to be a type string. So we'll type string. In our case, we're going to want it to be a type string. So we'll do string, comma, and then we'll go ahead and then we'll do bracket, bracket, and then we'll pass in our value. So value is equal to, and we can pass in whatever we want. So we can just say test user, let's say. And then we can basically copy and paste this and then do at level, at email, then at metadata. So, and then we could change this from DB type string to int and do, we'll say int32, may as well, string, and then the metadata is going to be a type. And actually it looks like I am wrong. Hold on a minute. It's going to be a Npgsql type and it will be a varchar. So we're going to do that instead. That's my fault. For some reason, I'm pulling back a different database type. We'll grab this, copy, paste, and then basically grab this, paste, and I will do a dot integer like that. And then this one, we're going to grab all of that, type dot, and if you remember, this metadata is a JSONB, so we'll pass that in, and there we go. And now for our value, we'll pass in a 1, testuser@gmail.com, and then the JSONB, we could actually have be whatever we want, but in my case, I'm going to pass in some JSON value. So bracket, bracket, slash, quote, role, slash, quote, colon, slash, quote, admin, slash, quote, comma, slash, quote, premium. Let's say if they have a premium membership, colon, true, like that. And you can see that that's inline JSON right here. Now, I know what you're thinking. Hold on, like, why would we ever do this? Well, sometimes the user might have some special stuff you want to store. So images or, you know, special flags or things like that. That's what this is useful for. Now I'm doing this just because it's going to be easier. You could add this to the database schema, I'm sure, but this is just kind of to demonstrate how this works. And now we will go ahead and fire off that command. So cmd dot execute, and we can pass in our non-query if we don't want stuff to come back, or we could do a reader if we want stuff to come back. In our case, we'll just do the non-query. And now if we go and we take a look at our PG admin, and now if we go into our Godot project and we hit play, you should see, hopefully, it will insert the data as expected. So let's go to PG admin. Let's right click our table and come in here and select the data here. And there is our data, just like that. Really simple, actually. And now let's actually talk about how to select some data out of here. So we want to get the data back. So in order to get the data back and to read that data, we're going to need to come up with some kind of schema, right? And I'll show that in a second, but to be able to select our data, it's actually really easy. I'm going to first halfway refactor this. So I'm going to put a bracket there, and I'm going to create a function. So private async task insert users into base like that. And I'll pass in that no Npgsql connection like that. And there we go. And that's just going to pull that out so it exists somewhere else. Then I'm going to select some data. So I'm basically just going to grab this guy here, copy, and we're going to go ahead and paste that. And we'll say select user from database, and we'll pass in the connection, comma, and we're going to put in a string name. And what we'll do is we'll select star from users where username is equal to @username. You'll see here, it's all pretty much the exact same. So we'll just grab all this, get rid of it. And then instead of doing an execute non-query, we're just going to do cmd.execute reader async. Now, normally you would think, okay, this is going to work. Kind of. So when this comes back, we're going to have a list of objects that come back. Let's say we have multiple usernames, right, that are all the same or something like that. We may want to return all of that data. So what we can do, we can create a typed object that's associated with this, and then we can basically select that data into that database object list, if that makes sense. So I'll come down here and say public class users, and we're going to say public string username, public int level, public string email, public, let's see, I believe metadata is one of them. So we'll say string metadata, and we'll also pass in a public int ID. And if I remember correctly, there also is whether or not they're active. Let me double check really quick in our pgadmin. Active is here, and created at is as well. So we'll grab this public bool active, and then public date time created at. And if you want to do get sets for this, you definitely can. In my case, it'll probably be fine without it. But we can come up here and now execute that reader. So typically, in my experience, when you're doing an execute read, all you have to do is initialize a list of objects. So first things first, we'll initialize that list. Var results is equal to new list of users, like that. And then we can say while, pass in this guy here, and we'll say, and then we can basically execute that read. So we'll say cmd execute reader, var using await, using a var reader equals await cmd.execute reader asynchronously, and then we'll create our, and then we'll say while await reader.read async. Then we'll go ahead and pull that data back. So var item is equal to user is equal to new users, bracket bracket, ID is equal to reader dot get int 32, and we'll pass back our ID like that. And now we can just come in here, paste this a few times, and then fill out the rest of it. So users, username, email, level, active, created at, and ID, username, level, email, active, created at, and then metadata. And so then we just have to fill this stuff out here. So get string, and then we'll pass back username, that, and then we'll do the exact same thing here. So this email, active, get bool, and pass in our active, get date time. I believe it's just created underscore at. So create tid underscore at, and then get string metadata, go, and then level is level at, and then we'll put a thing right there, and then we'll say results dot add user. like that. Now we can come in here and do gd.print our result. So that would be our results, like that. Okay, so once we have this, we should be good if we come up here and do await, insert users in database, pass in connection, semicolon, and then await, select user from database, connection, and then for the username, let's pass in the test user. So test user, and this should give us, in theory, 2 people, because we're going to once again run through this and insert a second version of our table or of our data here, and that's going to give us a second one. We should probably add an await here, and you can see here we have a systems collections generic list right here, users. So unfortunately, we have to kind of go through a little bit of a fancy thing to make this work. So what I'll do is I'll print out the object. So what I'll do is I'll just drop a breakpoint here, and then so what I'll do is I'll just grab this, Command X, come up here, paste, and then we'll just do user like that and see if that gives us a better result. So we'll refresh this. You can see we got back 4 different users, and that's exactly what we want. So I could just come in here and do users.id, comma, users.name, or user in this case, dot username, like that. And that'll just give me some of the information back so I can show you guys that at least is working. So I'll refresh this and you'll see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then they're all test users. Now, obviously, it's kind of a struggle because they're all the same data, but you can see here in our PG admin, if I hit play, you can see we have the data as we expect, and the created dates is different, which is exactly what we wanted. So that is pretty much how you do parameterized queries inside of the Postgre plugin. Now, next, we need to come in and actually add some tables to our database. So let's head up here and add a few more tables. Now I'm going to do something a little fancy. I'm going to do what's called a bulk operation. So in order to do a bulk operation or a batch command, you can come in here and create a var tables is equal to new bracket like that, and then we can actually just create a bunch of tables. So we'll go new like this, and then put a semicolon like that. And that's going to create an object or a list of commands here. So I'll get rid of that, and then we'll just do this, and there we go. And now I can just do this comma here, put a semicolon, comma, and then basically copy and paste this. Copy it. We're going to paste, comma, and paste. And we're going to create some different tables here. So we'll create characters like that, and then we'll have the ID. We'll have a user ID here as well. So user ID, and I'm going to make that into an int. We're going to do it at int, not null, references user ID on delete cascade. And I'll get into that in a minute because it's going to be one heck of a mess for us to talk about it right now. So we'll grab that. I'm going to keep the created at, so we'll burn these, burn this guy here. That metadata doesn't need to be there. I mean, technically, if you want to put metadata, you're welcome to. And we'll say health int check health greater than equal to 0. And again, I will go over that in one. And I'm going to duplicate that guy, and I'm going to do a level check as so int check level and make sure that it's above 0 like that. And if we really wanted to, I guess we could do a JSON B. That way we have something to play with, so I can show you guys some other stuff. We'll do, instead of metadata, we'll just do stats like that. And you can see here, what does all this mean, right? Well, again, we're making a primary key here, and then we're also coming in and we're doing this weird user ID thing. So what does this do? So user ID int not null references user ID. So what that's saying is that this references, this row here references this table here. So we're creating what's called a table structure. And think of it kind of like a way to link 2 tables together. So a player can have multiple characters, right? And so since a player or a user can have multiple characters, this links back to this guy because they can have multiple characters. Simple enough, right? And then we're saying on delete cascade. And what that means is basically when someone deletes a username, I want you to go in and delete all of their characters and everything that's associated with that character. And that's really nice because it allows you just to pull out that one row and pull everything that's associated with that completely out of the database. And that makes things so much easier. I can't tell you the number of times in Microsoft SQL that I'm trying to delete something and I have to delete all the other tertiary stuff and then, roll up to delete what I'm trying to delete. So it's a huge time saver. And so it's just so much easier to deal with. And then we have health int check. And basically what this is doing is it's just checking to see if the value by default is above 0, right? Or at least is 0 or above. And same thing with level. If somebody somehow tries to insert -1, right? That's a huge problem because a person can't be a -1 level, right? They can't have -1 health. So that's just a check against that. We have our stats, of course, which is JSON-B. And then we have our created stamp as well. And now the last table that we're going to build is our inventory table here. And we're going to do the same thing, int serial row. And then I'm going to pass in a type and I'm going to make that int and we're going to do a not null like that. And then I'm going to pass in the name, make that varchar 200 not to null. We're going to force them to throw in a name. That way, if they have an item, right, they can have that name. Now, technically speaking, you wouldn't want to do this for a full scale inventory. And one of these days I'll talk about exactly how to do this, but technically you should have another table or at least 2 more tables, one for the items and then one for their inventory, and then kind of a tertiary table that is called a lookup table. And you can kind of track everything on who has what, if that makes sense. But that's probably a little bit beyond the basics of, hey, here's how to do stuff. Now I'm going to grab this user ID and instead I will bring it down here. We'll paste it and I'll say character ID int not null references characters ID delete on cascade. And then we'll come in here. We'll change our metadata to properties like that. And I'm going to come in here and delete this guy like that. And that's going to allow us to create 3 tables instead of just 1. And now I'll come in here and I'm going to actually do a batch of this. I'll do await using var batch is equal to new npgsql batch like that. We'll pass in our connection like that. And then we will say for each var item in tables like that. And then we'll go ahead and say batch.add batch commands.add, and then we'll say new npg command and then bracket item like that. Or you could technically change this to SQL if you wanted to read a little bit better, so you probably should. And then we'll go ahead and execute that non-query. So we'll come in here and say await batch.execute non-query async like that. And there we go. And that'll just batch create those tables. And now I will go ahead and run this and we can see if our batch command works. So let's go back to Godot, refresh this guy, let it run. Ooh, we got an error. So that's not a good sign. So we have a error near syntax at or near a open bracket. See a little parentheses. So let's see. Let's take a look at this. So we have a comma here that might cause our problem. So we can do that. Probably what it was. So we'll hit Command S or Control S and we'll refresh this and let's see what happens. There we go. So now we got our test user connected to database and everything seemed to have executed correctly. So if we right click our table, refresh it, you'll see here we have characters and inventory as well. So now we need to do our transaction. And the reason why I'm doing a transaction is because it's going to make it that much cooler, right? Being able to insert data in an entire tree using a transaction is just, it's always a good effect. It always feels good to do it. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's come down here and let's say private async task perform transaction, and then we'll say npgsql connection, comma, int user ID. We're going to pass in a user ID to be able to insert all this data, which means we're probably going to need to change our user query here to return an ID. So I'll probably come in here and do bracket int like that. And I'll probably come in here and return. And we'll return a user ID. Actually, in my case, let me return the last user. I think that's probably a good idea. So we'll do return results.last.id. And that'll just return back our last user. That way we're not pulling back the same user over and over and over again. And that'll just help with that right there. So when we want to do a transaction, let's come up with a way to make this really scalable, right? So in order to do this, first we need to begin our transaction. So we'll say await using var transaction is equal to await connection dot begin transaction async, like that. Then we can do a try and then a catch, right? Now a try catch is always good because it can give us a little bit more information. So we'll just do gd.print, and that'll just basically pull back our data. And actually we should probably do e.message. And now we're going to do our SQL queries. So we'll type const string, and then we'll say insert character SQL, and we'll hit equals quote, and then we're going to basically do a basic insert statement. Now we've done this before, but we'll make this nice and quick. So we'll type insert into characters user underscore ID. I believe that's what we're doing up here. Let me double check. We're just using ID. So ID, comma, health, comma, level, comma, and then stats. And then we can say values. And for the values, we'll do a at user ID, comma, at health, at level, and then at stats, colon, JSON B, and then, and your parentheses, and then we'll type returning. And we'll pass back that ID. Now, basically what this is going to do is it's going to insert a character into our database, and then it's going to return its ID. So that way we actually know what that person's identification is. And it makes things easier, so that way we can identify what we've inserted and if we want to use stuff later. And in our case, we're going to be using stuff later because you can see I've duplicated this. And if we come down here, we'll say insert item, or perhaps insert inventory SQL, like that. We can say insert into inventory. And actually, I do think I want this to be user ID. I think we have, let me double, user ID right here. So this actually does need to be user ID. Let me scroll back down here and do that. There we go. And then for our inventory, we're going to pass in the type, comma, name, comma, character ID, comma, properties. And then we'll come back here and say type, name, character ID, and then properties. And then we'll come in here once we have this, and we'll basically create a command, right? Much like we've done before. So await using var char cmd for character cmd, npgsql command, insert character SQL, connection, comma, and then you'll notice that if I type transaction, that is a valid C# thing. And basically what that's going to do is tell this command to use that transaction, and it'll basically handle things as a batch operation, if that makes sense. And so now we can come in here and prepare that transaction or that connection. So await char cmd dot prepare, like that, and we'll do that asynchronously. And then we'll type char command dot parameters dot add, and then we're going to add in our new parameter, and we will go quote user ID. I believe that's what we're currently using. Yep, user ID. Yep, okay. I just want to make sure we have it correct. Comma, npgsql db type, dot integer, like that. And then we can pass in our object here. So value is equal to user ID, because we're going to be passing in this user ID. So basically we're going to be assigning that character to that user, if that makes sense. And now I'm going to copy this, paste, and I believe we'll need one more. So paste, and then we'll do at health, at level, and at stats. And in here we can do value. We'll say they have 100 health. We'll say they start at level 1. And for their value here, we could pass in whatever we want, right, for statistics. Now, again, some would argue that you could lay out a database properly for this, but like I said, this is for demonstration purposes. So we'll do quote / quote strength / quote colon. We'll say 10. And then I'll do comma / quote agility / quote colon 12. And now that I'm thinking about it, I'm going to need bracket and a bracket here as well. And there we go. And that'll make it into JSON format. The nice thing, again, I think I've said this before, but the nice thing about the JSON-B format is that you can make it whatever you want. So it makes it very, very flexible for later in, for the future. Now we're going to say var character ID is equal to convert.toInt 32 await char cmd dot execute scalar async. Now you might be wondering, okay, hold on a minute, Mitch. You've never used execute scalar. And the thing is execute scalar returns the first column of the row of the data that you are working with, right? So what that means is it's just going to return one value for us, and that's going to be the character's ID value, if that makes sense. And now we'll go ahead and insert our inventory items. Now this is where things get kind of cool. So we'll say var items is equal to new bracket, and then we'll add in these brackets like this, and then we'll say new bracket, and then we'll basically fill out what our items would look like. So let's see, we have type, if I remember correctly. So type equals 1 comma name is equal to, let's just say iron sword comma properties is equal to quote, we'll say / quote damage / quote, and we'll do 25, let's say. Now again, really, and I forgot a colon here, and then we'll do comma quote / and then we'll basically duplicate this 3 times. We'll say type is 2, type is 3. We'll go iron sword, we'll say health potion, and then here we'll come in here and say leather armor, like that. And for the properties here, we'll change this to be something like healing, and then we'll say defense. And this is kind of the point, right? This is kind of what I'm trying to show you guys. So you can come in here and actually have random properties with different values. You can see damage, healing, defense. If you had a database, all of it would be damage or something like that, or value or something like that, a more generic number or a more generic value, right, that's associated with it. Or you would need to create a separate table for that, right? So this can be useful for that purpose, where you don't have a fully schema for that type of thing, so you can kind of work with it. And now we can come in here and say await using var, must have double hit spacebar, there we go, inv-cmd is equal to a new npgsql command, insert inventory script connection comma transaction, just like we did above up here. That basically just says, hey, we're creating the SQL command, we're getting ready to run it, and then we prepare it, right? Just like we did last time. We'll create a for each loop for item and items, you can see right here. And then we can say inv command dot parameters dot clear, and then we'll actually add in our parameters, much like we did before. So what I'll do is I'll just grab one of these guys, copy it, paste it, We'll tab that in, and then I'll say inv command like that. And then we'll add in our parameters. So in our case, it's going to be type, if I remember correctly, first. And then we'll pass in the var type of string, or varchar in this case. And our value is going to be item dot name, like that, or type. So it actually would be a dot integer. I'm working too far ahead of myself here. So we'll do type, and then we'll paste it. I believe we'll only have 3 properties, so we'll just do the 3. Type, name, and properties. For this one, we'll type string, varchar, and then we'll do item.name. And then for this one, we'll do JSONB, and we'll do item.properties. And then we'll need to add one more property, and that is for the character ID. If you remember, our database has a character ID here, so we need to add that in. So character ID, and then we'll take the value that comes back from right here, the var character ID, and we'll just add it in here. So dot int integer, and we'll pass in our character ID like that. Now, this should work in theory, but first we have to fix this up here. I didn't change this to JSONB, so JSONB, and that could have caused some issues. And now, once we have this, we should be able to execute our query. So we'll come in here and we'll type await inv dot execute non-query async, and there we go. And this basically just executes the query and inserts it into the database. So this is going to loop through and basically insert all 3 items into our database and link it to our character, so our character has an item. And that's basically how we'll keep track of all that. Now we can type await transaction dot commit asynchronous. And then we can come in here and just say gd.print transaction complete, like that. In theory, this should work. So we'll come in here, we'll copy our perform transaction, we'll go up to the top, and then we'll type await perform transaction connection, comma, and now we're going to need some kind of user ID, right? So in order to do our perform transaction, we had perform transaction, and because of that, our task here for select user from database needs to have a var ID is equal to await our database, and then we can type ID like that. And that will allow us to select the user's information and pass it into our database. So now in theory, this should just work. So let's go back to Godot here, and we'll hit play. Well, we do have a syntax error, so that's not a good sign. Position 62 of ending at or near @ sign. So let's take a look at our VS Code here, and let's see what's going on. So we'll take a look at our code. My guess is it's somewhere in here. So let's see. Insert into characters, user ID, health level stats, values. I'm sure you guys are screaming at me, but let me take a look. I am missing a parentheses here, and same thing with this one. So that should fix our problem. So let's hit Control S, and let's go back to Godot here. Refresh. Column user ID does not exist, so that's also not a good sign. Let's take a look at our database here, and let's see. So character, it is user ID. There's no underscore, so let's see if we chose to do underscore. I'm going to select from characters, ID, user lowercase ID, that's fine. This has I'm just going to make sure that everything is set up. Let's see. User ID, character ID, error adding inventory. I think I figured it out. So basically what's going on here is you can see here we have a wait char command prepare async that actually has to happen after we do our parameters. So that's my fault. And you can see I also moved this one down here as well. And now if we open up Godot and we hit play, it go ahead and creates the stuff. And now we can take a look at our PG admin here, and we can come in here and select data from our users. So I'm going to hit play. You'll see we have 10 users total right here. And then we can come in here and select characters. You should see 2 of them because I did do a test, right? And it successfully did it. So we do have 2 of them right here. And you can see I have their inventory as well. So you can see right here, there's their items. And you can see they all have the same items, obviously, but it does seem to work. So you might be wondering what the difference between a transaction and a batch action is, right? So we just showed you what a transaction is, and up here I showed you what a batch command is, right? And basically the biggest difference is transactions are treated as a single unit, so everything must succeed or nothing succeeds. It is ACID certified, right? So it basically will always make sure that all of the data is, and it ensures that data integrity. Whereas batch actions are more about running things together, right? So it's a single round trip. So it's about efficiency, not about safety, if that makes sense. So it's faster than sending individual statements, and it's nice and quick, right? Now, you could technically do both. You could have a transaction, do a batch action, and then commit your transaction. That is technically doable, but that's basically the big difference between the two. So now the last question is, how can we select our data from our database and join all that data together, right? Well, basically, I showed you guys how to select data, right? Select user from database. We're basically going to do the exact same thing, but instead we're going to select an entire user plus their characters plus all of their inventory data. So it should be pretty quick. So we'll say private async task select user data, and we'll pass in our Npgsql connection, and then we'll pass in our int user ID, much like we've done a few times here. So when we want to do that, what we can do, and something that I forgot to mention is I believe I might have changed user ID to user underscore ID. The reason why I did that is because I wanted to make sure it wasn't a typed issue. It's not, so your guys' code should just work, but just note that I have user underscore ID here. So just keep that in mind. So when we want to select our data, we're going to create, just like every other time, we're going to come in and create our SQL statement. So we'll say equals at quote, and we will say select from inventory I, inner join characters on, and here C on I dot character ID is equal to C ID. And then inner join users U on C dot user ID is equal to U dot ID, where U dot ID is equal to at user underscore ID, user ID, order by I dot type, comma, I dot name, like that. And I will say select from inventory I, blah, 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 blah. ID. This might need to be, if we take a look at our character table, user underscore ID. So you can see that this will need to change. So see user ID, and there we go. And now I'll want to select the data. Now we could do a select star if we wanted to, or we could select just specific sets of data. I think in this case, I'm going to do star for right now, and we can burn that bridge when we get there. So now I'll say await using var cmd is equal to npgsql command sql, comma, connection, like that. Then we'll add in our parameters. So cmd.parameters dot add new at user ID, comma, npgsql db type dot integer, like that, bracket value is equal to user ID, like that. And the reason why this works is because we're generically typing this, so it should work, but I just wanted to show you guys that off because you don't technically need to have, if you come into our perform transaction, you don't technically need to have this new NS or Npgsql parameter here, but I just like to use it because it looks good. But technically speaking, you don't need to do that. You could just do this new here. Now we do have an error here. This cannot be used as a method. That's because I need to do a new in front of it. Technically, if I wanted to, I could do this. So that's why that's not working. And then we will prepare it. So await cmd.prepare async, and then we'll execute that. So await using var reader is equal to await cmd.execute non-query reader async to pull back our data. And now we're going to need some kind of object to house this. So we'll come in here and create a new class. So we'll say public class inventory bracket bracket, and we will go ahead and create that. Now I know again that you can put these in different classes or like different files, which is technically the correct way to do it. But for this tutorial, I'm just doing it this way just to make things a little bit easier for us. So I'm going to say inventory item instead, and I'm going to say public int ID, public int type, public string name, public int character ID, and I'll probably want to do capitals for that. So character ID, public string properties, and then we need a way to link it back to, and then we'll put a created at, and then we'll say public, and then we need some kind of character object. So we'll do that, and then we'll just create that. So public class. So we'll create a character, and then we'll say public int ID, public int user ID, public string name, public int character ID, public string properties, public date time created at, and public character users user. And we'll probably just call that user instead of users. And I'll fix this. So public date time created at. So basically what we can do here is this is going to pull back all of our data. So ideally we probably should select our stuff downstream so that way it is a bit more efficient. But I'm also trying to figure out a way to show inner joins and things like that. So forgive me, it's probably not the most efficient way. Technically, we should select from our character table, then pull back those IDs, select from our user table, pull back those IDs, select from our character table, pull back those inventory IDs, and then select our inventory and then kind of compile everything. So I'm doing things a little bit less efficient than it should be done, but I want to show how a join works and why it works. So if we take this guy here, we copy it, we open up Postgre, and then we paste it. If we hit play, well, first we have an error because of this. So I'm going to put this at ID. Let me see. Which ID does our characters exist in? Let me view that data really quick. We have a user ID of 9 and a user ID of 10. So I'm going to do user ID of 10 just for ease of use. We'll hit play, and you'll see that we get back all of this data. And so this pulls back all of the data from the different tables. So you can see here, I have my items. Here, I have my character stats. And here, I have my user information. And what I'm trying to show is that you can pull back all that user data in one shot, right? But you can see that there's duplicated data. So it's not necessarily the most efficient way to pull back data, but it is a way to do it. Now, if you want to do it in an extremely efficient way, what you can do is you could change this to instead be a SQL statement that selects the user data first, then selects the character data. And I think that that's going to be a better route for us now that I'm thinking about it out loud, because I want to show you guys the right way, not necessarily a way. But just know that if you want to pull data where a table exists, you can do it this way. And you can technically match all this up if you really wanted to. What you would do is you would just loop through your items, right? And then basically create sub objects. And I guess I'll show that, and then we'll come in and do this the right way. So what you can do is you could come in here and say var results is equal to new list inventory item, like that. And then you would just say while await reader.read async like this. And then we could basically build out our items. So var item is equal to a new inventory item like that. And then bracket bracket ID is equal to reader.get int 32. And then pass back our inventory item, or our inventory ID. Now, I have a feeling that this might actually cause an issue, because if we take a look, you can see we have ID here and ID here. So it's not going to know which one to pull back. We're going to need to type all of our stuff. So let's come in here and do select i.id as and that should be pretty much everything. And if we select this guy here, we go back to pgadmin and we paste it and we do 10 once again and we run it, you'll see that we're going to strip down the amount of data that we're pulling back, which is good. And we're just coming back with this data set. Now, of course, we could expand this to however big we want, but you can see that they now have the proper names here for our data. So now we can come in here and hook it all up. So int reader 32 is equal to inventory item, or ID in this case, comma, name is equal to reader.get string, inventory item name, type is reader.get int 32 as item type. We'll duplicate a few more. Properties is, I guess I'm not really pulling back properties, so I should probably do that. So i.item properties right here, and we'll pull back i.properties. So item properties like that. Then it's going to be character ID is equal to character ID like that. And then you can see that, well, we have an issue here. So let's take a look. Cannot implicitly convert that to string. So we'll say string, not to string, get string. There we go. And then we need to come up with our new character, right? So to do that, we can say character is equal to a new character like that, bracket, bracket. And then I can pull back my character ID like so, copy, paste, health like that. And it says that ID does not exist. I'm not sure. Let's double check our identification. It's ID. I don't like that that's different, but that's fine for right now. And then we'll double check. If I remember correctly, characters do have health. They don't, but let's check our table definition. Yes, they do. I just missed that part when I was declaring this stuff. So characters have public int health and public int level like that. I forgot that those were things. So we'll scroll back up and then we'll say health and we'll say capital H. I believe we're actually we're using lowercase h here. And then we'll paste a few more times. Level is equal to c dot character level. And it looks like I might have skipped stats as well. Yes, this is supposed to be stats, not properties. There we go. I'm mixing up my inventory item and my character here. So we'll come in here, stats, and then we'll get back a get string, and we'll pull back our character stats like that. And then we'll come in here and pull back user ID is equal to get int 32, and we'll do user ID. And then we'll pull back our user. So user is equal to new users, bracket, bracket, and then we could pull back our user information. You can see right here, here's our user information. So we'll type ID is equal to, and then it's going to be reader, and we'll change that to user ID. Level is equal to reader.get int 32, user level, comma, email is equal to reader.get string email. And then finally, the last thing, which is our metadata, is equal to reader.get string user metadata. And yeah, that was a lot. So basically, we're just kind of pulling back all of our stuff, and then we're basically going to just add it. So we'll hit semicolon, and then results.add, and then we'll just add our item to it like that. And now we can come in here and actually print that stuff out. So in order to print that stuff out, it'll make it nice and simple. We'll say for each var item in collection, and it does not exist in current context. It's because that needs to be results. For items in results, and then we'll come in here and say gd.print $quote bracket item name type is owned by, and then item.character.user.username like that. And that should give us back a pretty good data structure, right? So now we can select that data. We'll scroll all the way up here and do await paste connection, comma, and then user ID. Or I guess in this case, it'll just be ID. There we go. And now we should be able to come in here and refresh it. And in theory, we should see, there we go. So there are 3 items that are owned by this character: iron sword, health potion, and leather armor. And they are owned by empty data, which is not good necessarily. So we didn't get any errors, which is good, but I'm curious why we're getting empty data here. So if we take a look, username, the reason why is because the username is not being populated, which is my fault. So I'm assuming we're not even returning the username here. No, we are not. So we would need to do, if we take a look at our Postgre, you can see we have a user name inside of our users, and we select that data. You can see that they have a username right here, right? So we could actually pull back that user information by just coming in here and doing u.username as username like that. And then we can just come down here, comma, username is equal to reader.getString username like this, username. And then if we come back into Godot here and we refresh it, it should now show the proper data. There we go. User, sword, health potion, and leather armor owned by these guys. Now, this is not a very efficient way to pull back the data, but that is a way to pull back the data. So in order to do this correctly, let's come in here and let's create a new function. So we'll say private void, private async task. And we'll say select character data. And we're going to pass in the same parameters that we're going to pass in up here. So I'll just grab this really quick. Let's just grab this guy. There we go. Or maybe not. Missing the end. That's why. Okay. And there we go. And in order to do this correctly, what we need to do is we need to basically copy all of this. So we'll just grab this guy, copy, and paste. And instead of doing this crazy selection statement that we're doing right here, what we can do is just pass in just this section here, and that will execute our stuff and pull back our characters, right? So if we have more than one character, it'll pull back multiple characters, right? And so we need to say while await reader dot read async, then we can actually pull back our data. So basically exactly like we did it before, we'll say var character is equal to new character like that. ID is equal to the same stuff that we did here. So I'll literally just copy this. There's no point in changing it. We'll paste that. There we go. And then for our inventory, we'll just currently leave that to nothing. That way it's just not causing any issues. And now we'll need a list of characters. So var characters is equal to a new list of characters like that. And then we can come down here and add that character. So characters dot add, and then we can add in our character like that. And now we can basically duplicate this entire thing, but paste it here. And instead of SQL, we'll say inventory SQL, and this actually isn't going to work here because we need to change this. Let's actually pull this off and get rid of this. There we go. Sorry about that. I'm kind of messing around with this as I go. We'll do character. I believe it's character or characters. So let's see. Characters. So we'll do an S and then we'll do a C there. And that will basically allow us to do what we need to do. And now we can come in here and say while for each var item in characters, then we can do this bit of code here. So we'll Control X that, put that in here. And then when we want to do our inventory stuff, we'll just come up here. Let's grab the inventory section right here, come down here, paste it, and then do this. And instead of doing this where I user ID is ID, we can actually just come in here and say where I ID is at character ID. Don't worry about ordering it. That's not a big deal. And then we can come in here, change this to character ID, and then use our item dot character ID. And then we can come in here and say inventory CMD, and then we'll copy this, paste, 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 and then inventory reader. And instead of characters, do items, inventory item, and then we can say inventory item, and then we can change our character. And actually, really, we could just grab this bit right here, copy, and paste. And then when characters dot add, we can basically just say items dot add. And instead of character, of course, we want to say inventory item. That way it just is easy for readability. And that will basically handle that. And then we can just say item dot, and you can see here that we should have a, well, really, arguably, this should be for each character in characters, and then just do character dot. You can see we have all of our character ID stuff, and if I remember correctly, and we can come in here and just say public inventory item, public list inventory item, items, like that. Then we can also do something like this and say public character. So we'll do a list of characters like that. And then we can come up here and say character.items is equal to items. And then when we're done with all of that, then we can add our characters to our player. So we'll be able to return a list of characters like that. And then that means that we're gonna have to change our task to actually return a list of characters. So list of character like that. And there we go. And now when we call this, we can come up here and actually call this value here. We'll come in here and say await, paste, connection, comma, ID. And then we can actually do a, since this doesn't really return an item, it just returns that one ID. I kind of don't want to go through the whole process of refactoring all of this, but I probably should to do it correctly. Technically speaking, when you're selecting your user from the database, it shouldn't just return an int. In my case, I just have it returning that result.id. But really, we're creating a new user here, see, in our results. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to return a character like that, or a user, I'm sorry. And I'll return results.last. And then I can come up here and change this from var ID to user. And then I can do user.id like that instead. And that'll give me basically what I want, but refactoring it in a better way. And then I can do user.characters is equal to that. And now I should have everything that I need. So now I should be able to do gd.print and print out my characters. So I'll say at, and then $ quote, user bracket, user dot username, space, has been found, space, character, bracket, user dot characters dot, let's say last, so we can pull back our last character, dot name has been pulled, period. It has bracket user dot characters dot last dot items dot count items. In theory, this should just do it. So we'll jump over to Godot, we'll refresh, and let's see what happens. Well, first things first, everything fails. So item does not exist in current context. So right here, it's mad. That's because we did a refactor. So we'll say character ID. Let's try that again. And we have another error, as always. So syntax error from position NoSQL. Postgre tutorial 135. So here is where it's running into that issue, it looks like. Or at 315, I'm sorry. And it's mad because it says here that syntax error near or from. Let's take a look at this. Select these guys. Probably that little comma right there is probably going to cause our problem. Let's go ahead and eliminate those. Where UID. Make sure that this is set up. See, this says UID, but I don't actually have a UID is equal to user ID. So we need to do, because this doesn't have a user, right? It just has a character. We'll have to do C dot, and in this case, I believe it's just user ID. Let me double check really quick. Unfortunately, when you start pulling SQL from random spots, it can cause lots of issues. So we need to take a look at that. Let's see. When we do our create tables, our character is user underscore ID in this case. So we'll come down here and we will select where user ID is equal to ID, I.ID. I mean, I technically don't need, this is character ID. So this also is wrong here. This should be character ID, I believe. Let's triple check. So we have character ID right here. So we'll scroll back down and we will get character ID is equal to character ID. And that should get rid of all of our syntax errors, at least in theory. So let's try it once again. So we'll refresh and there we go. You can see we now have all of our data. Iron Sword is owned by test user. Oh, actually no, because this is part of our test. Field not found, user and row user ID. So it's once again here. So let's see. Index out of range, field not found in row user ID. So let's take a look. Unfortunately, I coded this really quickly, so that means that it's going to run into potentially some issues. So if we look, we have CID as character ID, C health, C character level, character stats from characters where underscore user ID. All right, so if we take a look, you can see here we have user ID is equal to user ID, and I think that's our problem. So I think we need to change this to user ID. Not that it necessarily matters for this case, but I believe that's our case. And then here we have character ID, probably should be instead the character.character ID, because we'll probably run into the same issue. Technically speaking, we don't need this data, but it's always a good idea just to hook it up anyway. Now let's try it one more time. So we'll refresh. Still more errors. Index out of range. Ordinal must be between 0 and 3. Now the good news is that this error means that we're getting somewhere at least. So what this means is basically we're only returning a few things and then we are expecting to have additional items than what we are returning, more or less. So let's take a look and let's see potentially what it could be. We have ID, health, level, and stats. So that should be fine. And then here we have item, item name, item type, item properties, and then character ID. This is why we're having an issue right here. So we need to get rid of these guys because it's out of range, if that makes sense. So we'll pull these out. Basically what's going on is Postgre is saying, hey, I only have 4 return values, but you're trying to get a 5th because we were doing that reader.getInt. Well, that's fine, but that reader.getInt doesn't exist. So it wouldn't work, if that makes sense. When this comes back, it only comes back with 4 columns, and we were expecting it to come back with a 5th, according to this. That's why we have to get rid of that read, if that makes sense. So now we can do this. We can hit refresh. And now you'll see that we have one more error. A command is already in progress. So what does that mean? So because it's not executing sequentially, what's going on is the command is already being ran while we're trying to run our second command. This is a common problem that a lot of people run into, so I want to make sure that we covered it. So basically, you could see I'm running a SQL command, and then I'm running a second SQL command directly after that. And basically, that causes a lot of problems. And once again, that's where transactions come in, right? So if we come up here, you can see we have our transaction. We are running multiple SQL queries, and we're not running into that issue. And the reason why is because that's literally what transactions are for. Let's copy this transaction. And let's come up here, paste it, close our try, and then do a catch. Failed to get characters, e.message, like that. And that'll return our message and our information. Now we do have a return characters that's upset. That's because we need to actually create a new list of characters before we do all of that. So we'll do that. And then we can just get rid of this guy. And that will basically allow us to have our character return outside of our try catch. And then let's just tab that in for aesthetic purposes. That's probably too much, but we'll tab that in for aesthetic purposes. And same thing with this. So we need to do a transaction. So you can see we have our begin transaction. And then down here, we have our transaction commit async. And we'll need to commit our transaction as well. So we'll just do await transaction, commit transaction. And then we need to also notify our command to be a part of that transaction. So comma, transaction, and then same thing here, comma, transaction. And now in theory, providing we did everything correctly, it should work. So let's try it again and let's see what happens. All right, so I think I might have figured it out. So basically, we need to close our reader when we're done with it. And something else I noticed was right here, we were calling out reader, not inventory reader. So that's a pretty big problem. So we were trying to read out the wrong thing. Now that wouldn't have solved the problem we were running into right off the bat, but it does explain out away why we were having issues. So first thing, to close our reader, you can see we're reading our stuff here. We need to come in here and actually close that reader. So reader.close async like that. And then we can just do an await in front of it like that. And then I'm going to go down here and do the exact same thing. We're going to make sure that everything's closed. So we'll say inventory. We'll make sure that this is outside of this little bracket here. So inventory reader dot close async. And we'll drop an await in front of it. There we go. And that should allow us to do it. So basically what I made in changes was I swapped it into a transaction because the transaction is just going to be faster and more efficient, and it'll allow us to roll back if something goes wrong. And then we also came in and adjusted this inventory reader to be inventory reader, not reader, just because that can cause some issues. And then finally, we closed our readers to make sure that they're closed before we move on to the next thing. Because if you have a reader open and then you try to do another read, it can cause some issues. So let's jump back to Godot here and let's hit play. And you should see here, test user has been found, character has been pulled, and it has 3 items. So that pulled back all of our stuff right there. And from there, you can basically do whatever you need to do with your character. If you want to display their information, or if you want to apply it to your own character, things like that. At that point, you have the data. So at this point, you have a pretty good understanding of how to use Postgre within Godot, C#. And from here, you can expand into all sorts of stuff. You know, you want to do AI workloads, or you want to, host it out on a server, things like that. You can definitely do that all right here. And hey, if you like this video, go and hit that like button. Hey, if you dislike this video, go and hit that dislike button, because I'm here to make content for you guys. This video was a viewer suggested video. And so if you have any suggestions, please leave them in the comments below, and I'll be more than happy to take a look at them. I'm still working on a WWISE tutorial, and I'm running into issues with sound bouncing off walls and things like that. So, there's that. So look forward to that. I'm working on a rhythm game tutorial, so also look forward to that. And I'm working on a add mob tutorial, but unfortunately the plugin is not currently up to date. So I'm sure that'll be a fun one to take a look at. But if you guys have any suggestions, please leave them in the comments below or jump on my GitHub. Link is in the description for that. And I'm more than happy to take a look at it. Suggestions is how I make everything at this channel. And hey, if you have any questions or comments, please leave them in the comments below or jump on my Discord. Links in the description for that. And anybody there, more than happy to help you out. But that is all I have for you guys today. So thank you so much again for watching, and I'll see you all next time. Thanks.